Audio is being unmuted. Camera is live whenever you guys are ready to start.
I wanted to welcome everybody back to the public meeting of the Board of Education, April 16th, 2020. I think we're just going to jump straight to an update from Mr. Ricky on our budget and our bond update.
Thank you. What I'd like to do is I've got a worksheet that I've supplied to the board, and we'll make sure that that gets up on board docs. And would like to take a moment to just kind of go over the impact of the state budget, how that impacts the district's budget, what we have done so far, and some of our recommendations and thoughts moving forward as we look to
Jim,
present
can I
the revised
just,
budget
I'm
to the
sorry to
board.
interrupt. Can I just remind everyone to mute their mics, please?
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you. As you look at the worksheet that's in front of you, as I go over here, this is my, you watch the evening, folks. This is like the monologue from the basement or from someone's attic in my case. But what I'd like to do is I'm going to share with you the first page that we're looking at is the revenues related to the operating budget for the school district, compared to where we think they are now and where they were from the preliminary budget that we brought out earlier in the year.
Can you put that on the screen, Jim?
I don't know how to cast it on the screen. I'm sorry.
Okay, never mind. That's fine.
I haven't gotten to that step yet. But really what we're looking at is there's about $646,000 in revenue that we're seeing reductions in compared to the original proposed budget. $241,000 of that is related directly to the state budget. The largest component of it is $225,000 of foundation aid, a smaller reduction of about $10,000 in BOCES aid, $8,000 in some building aid. And then there's an adjustment. When you look at this worksheet, you'll see there's an adjustment called pandemic adjustment for $84,000. And it's kind of an in and out. And so it nets out to be zero. The out money is the state reducing their aid to us by $84,928. And the money coming in is the federal money related to the CARE legislation for an equal amount. So as we sum those up again, we're looking at about $241,000 less in state aid for next year compared to the original budget. We also looked at our other revenues associated with the budget, and we think it's responsible of us to make recommendations that we're going to see some reductions. Normally, the school district receives sales tax receipts, a portion of sales tax from economic and retail activity. And in the original budget, we had proposed $1 million in expected receipts. And this was really the result of an increase in sales tax that had recently been passed proposed by the county, passed by the state in the current fiscal year that we're in. And with that, with the reductions in the economic activity that we're seeing right now, we believe we should roll that number back 25% to from what our proposed original estimate was. So the original estimate was $1 million, and we're recommending a 25% reduction to $750,000. We're also recommending we reduce our interest income on cash deposits that we have. Of course, we hold our deposits in banks. And when we do that, we receive some interest for our overnight deposits. It's never a lot of money because of the way we have to hold our money in highly secure instruments. But nonetheless, we in our original budget, we had expected to receive about $90,000 next year. And with what we're seeing now and the overnight rates dropping, the overnight window, I think, is down to zero at the Fed. And it's certainly, it's gone down for us quite a bit too. So we need to drop that interest income by 2/3 from $90,000 to $30,000. So it's a $60,000 drop. And then the third reduction that you're going to see as you look at this spreadsheet is a reduction in arts and education. And the arts and education program is a program whereby the district coordinates generally class trip programs through BOCES. And with those expenditures, say we spend $1,000 on a trip in year number one. In year number two, we receive half of that back in the form of a revenue. We call that an expense-driven revenue. This year, because of the reduced time in school for the children, and because many of these trips occur at the latter part of the year, we're not going to experience, so the kids aren't going to be able to experience all of those trips. And as a result, our original estimate of $185,000 in arts and education revenue for next year needs to be reduced. And the recommended reduction is $95,000. So when we look at the sum of the reduction in the state aid of about 241,000 and the other reductions in sales tax, interest income, and arts and education, we're looking at a total revenue reduction of just under $650,000. It's $646,247. If I could just take a minute too and go back to the state aid. State aid is generally flat from the current year that we're in right now, and the reduction we're seeing is a reduction from what the state had originally proposed. So that's why we see the drop. But when the state passed their budget, they also put something in that really has never been out there before. The state's going to have 3 measurement periods during the fiscal year. And really what it is, it's an opportunity for the state to measure the revenue that's coming into the state to see if they have enough money to support the aid that's in the current budget. So the first measurement period ends actually this April 30th. And at that time, the director of budget for the state has the ability to propose reductions to that state aid to the school districts. And if they do make those recommendations, the state legislatures then have 10 days to put together an alternate spending plan and pass it. And if they don't, the budget director's recommended reductions stand. So there's going to, like I said, there's going to be 3 measurement periods. The first one in April, second one I believe is in early fall, and the last one is at the end of December. So when we look at the state aid, where it is, and we see it's $241,000 less than the original budget, we also have to be aware that there's a potential for that number to go down, for the state aid number to be reduced even further during the school year. And that's just something we're thinking of and we're being mindful of as we put together recommended reductions. And then also, of course, where does this leave us for next year with state aid and revenue? If we look back to the recession back in 08, 09, the school district experienced about $1 million in reduced state aid. So that's not next year, but the following year. I don't think it'd be unreasonable for us to think along those terms of those types of reductions that we could be seeing moving forward, as well as increased expenditures related to pension expense. But I don't want to get into that right now. What I do want to talk about is kind of with the reduced expenditures, the district really has three opportunities to adjust to the budget. One is if the district chose to, you could certainly say, we're not going to make any reductions in expenditures, we're just going to tax more. But again, given the current economic situation and where we are, and the board's direction on putting the budget together, that's just not something that's going to happen. So with that, we really have to work hard to look and see, can we increase revenues in any other ways? And that's something where there really is no opportunities to do that. We're certainly always looking for opportunities to increase revenue, but to find $650,000 in increased revenues in this kind of an economic environment, it is certainly very trying. So the third option there is to look to reduce our expenditures. And since the budget was originally proposed, we know that some things have changed, and we can give you an update on that. And then and we have some recommended adjustments and or potential adjustments that could happen in order to get ourselves to that balanced budget. As we look to reduce our budget, we know our contingency is going to come down, and we can revise our contingency so that we're still at 2% of our budget. That's about an $83,000 reduction as we look to shake things out. We also know as we look through our staffing, and we're doing more of our staffing plans for next year, we see there's probably about a 0.6 position that we can pick up. At the last board meeting, the board approved extending the retirement incentive for teachers, and another teacher chose to retire. So there's a savings that we're able to pick up there. We also recently canvassed for an occupational therapist position, and we're unsuccessful. We had been covering it with a contracted services or a consultant occupational therapist, and if we continue to do that, we could save about $31,000 there. And then we've had miscellaneous personnel adjustments from people onboarding. It's just a slight increase of about $2,800. Looking at our budget, there's also some things that we can do this year and that therefore avoid the cost for next year. Things like some furniture purchases, textbook purchases. We were planning on doing some work at Glover Field, relining the field, giving a good deep cleaning, really spruce it up to make it, to put it in good shape so that everything looks great when that final turf and everything else is taken care of over there. Working with PPS and special education, we know that there are some special education students who look to be graduating, so we can save some dollars on tuition there. Our final workers' comp insurance numbers came in. We saw some savings there, as well as in technology with Xerox by again working through BOCES and lowering our costs, and transitioning some expenses to our grant funds. The combination of all of those items, we're able to pick up about $470,000 in savings and expenditures. And these are things that are pretty much known that we can do. And then there's other things that we can look at. And as we look at things that are new to this year's budget, things that are new, we're going to be leasing office space next year. That's certainly new. We're in negotiations with our collective bargaining agreements with two of our bargaining units right now. Those are opportunities. We also have some open positions, two non-teaching positions that are open, although they both are somewhat needed, and some of them are specified by contract. And the board also has the ability to increase appropriated fund balance. And really we've talked about that before. We've already appropriated some fund balance into this year's budget. We have been trying to step it down a little bit because really you want to save those dollars for future years when you kind of a rainy day. Because you're going to have, what's going to happen is once you use it, it's a one shot and it's not a recurring dollar. And I think you're going to be looking for those dollars moving forward. And again, we're already using, I think, over $1 million in fund balance to balance this year's budget. And then we have the other items that were added in the preliminary budget. We had a 0.5 staff developer position that had opened. We upped our number for overages. Overages are when a teacher teaches a subject beyond what their original their assigned teaching load is. And budget to budget, we're increased a little bit. Actual to budget, we're about even. And that goes with monies that we had budgeted for our substitute teachers and for our security monitor, or our lunch coverage, which is our security monitors and our lunch coverages. We had increased the budgets in those two areas, but really we had increased the budgets to our actual levels. It wasn't as if we were adding program to those areas. So when we look at those types of items, there's also an opportunity to get us to that $656,000 gap that we're looking at. Again, as we looked at it, we know about 470 that we can pretty much take right now. And that leaves about 176,000 for us to continue to look for before we bring a final budget before the board, which is be tax cap compliant, and that something that you can move forward to the community. And our recommendation is also to wait until that first measurement period is completed at the state level, so we have a better understanding of what that state aid is going to do. Just lastly, if you look at the third page of the worksheet here, and this is where it gets kind of complicated, right? Because we have the operating budget, which talks about all the things that you really think about with the school, which is, the teachers and the supplies and the sports and all those typical teaching and school type things. And then the third page really talks about how we're going to fund our debt, which is for all the projects for our buildings. In the original budget, we had proposed that we are going to be, or we had assumed that we are going to be receiving some additional dollars related to our borrowing for bond anticipation notes to pay for our current construction. And we did that borrowing in March 17th, excuse me. And we had generally a very successful borrowing. It's for short-term notes, $10 million. I think our average interest rate was 1.5%. And Rick Gansey from Capital Markets Advisors will be before the board at the next board meeting to kind of talk about market conditions and what we can expect. But what happened in this borrowing that we weren't expecting is we were expecting to receive a cash premium up front from those folks that were going to participate in the bond sale. That didn't happen. So as a result, that would increase our debt service payment. And there's really two ways I think the board can address that. One is if the board chose to, you could increase the tax levy, which is increasing taxes, and that would still be within the tax cap because it's the debt or the monies that you're raising necessary to service the debt. And the other opportunity that the board has is you could use our debt service fund. And I know this is something we've talked about before, and we've used that, and the district has used that as an ability to bring down that tax rate a little bit. And if you were to do that, if you used 100,000 of it, that would get us back down to that original budget number that came out with the proposed budget of 3.15%. And if we applied 200,000 of that debt service fund, you could get to 3 or just under 3%. So I think those are helpful numbers for you. We're also going out for long-term bonds in November, and I think Rick will tell you the same thing, that we thought this time that we'll probably get a cash premium for those longer-term bonds, and we'll be able to replenish some of those dollars that we're using or that you could use this year as part of our long-term borrowing that would happen in November. So that's kind of where the budget stands right now. Again, we've the kind of thumbnail sketch on the whole thing. We've had revenue reductions of about $650,000. We've identified about $470,000 in expenditure reductions, and we have of known expenditure reductions, and then we also are working on finding the remaining balance to bring before the board so that you still have a tax cap compliant budget. And we'll bring that forward, I think, once we get that final adjustment period through with the state and we have a better understanding where we are with state aid. I don't know if there's any questions, or if I said something unclear, please help me clarify it.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks for the update, Jim.
Okay.
Does anybody have any questions? Thank you for staying up on all this. And
Thanks.
definitely unprecedented times when it comes to our school's budget.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think Jim also did have a quick update on our construction projects too, if you wanted to touch on that, if there's no questions on budget.
Okay, thank you. The good news is with our construction projects, we're still moving forward. I'll kind of I'll give a quick overview, and then Frank Arturi from Triton Construction, our construction manager, is on this call as well, and he can kind of give you a little bit more detail. But Hutchinson is moving forward. There needed to be some clarity about whether or not it was an essential project, and working with the Empire State Development Corporation, they provided greater guidance. School projects are, well, as a school entity or governmental entity, we're outside of that order, but also schools and public and private schools are both considered essential. So the work is continuing in a safe manner, and Frank could talk a little bit about that at the Hutchinson School. At Glover Field, they got the carpet down. I keep calling it the carpets, I'll call it the turf. And they're still working on that. It looks like they took about a week off, 2 weeks off, but we're expecting them back next week to continue some work there. And at the last board meeting, the board approved awarding the bids for the roof work on the annex and on the masonry. And we sent awards letters to them, again, making sure that they were able to accomplish this work while being compliant to all the COVID-19 requirements, the state, federal, local requirements that have been put in place, and the guidance that have been in place. And those letters went up to those folks. So that work we expect to happen this summer. And Frank, do you want to jump in there and update us on anything else?
Sure. Thanks, Jim. Good evening, everyone. This is Frank Arturi with Triton. Just starting at Hutch, within the last 3 weeks, we've poured over 500 yards of concrete. We have pretty much all the footings, and Monday will be our last pour on the foundation.
Wow.
From From that, we're going to be jumping, and we already have it in motion, jumping on the waterproofing of the foundation walls and backfilling and footing drains. That should all happen next week. And immediately after that, we're going to be having our mechanical contractors in, starting the underground plumbing below the slabs of the building. So things have been going very, very well. We are a little ahead of schedule. I'd like to stay that way.
Definitely. It's good news.
So yes, and we also received some very good news. Our steel, for the steel structure, we were actually moved up on the queue because of there were many cancellations and a lot of other jobs got pushed back. So we actually got moved up, so we could pretty much maybe see steel in about 4 weeks, which is considerably ahead of schedule. So a lot of good news coming out of Hutch. The men have been cooperating very, very much. They are keeping their safe distancing. They're wearing masks, and they are doing a very, very good job on Hutch. As Jim mentioned, the men installing the turf down at Glover took a week off just to kind of let things kind of reset, just let things kind of pass. And they will be remobilizing on Monday, and they will be staying on the turf field until completion. So I'm estimating another 2 weeks. Right now the turf is down, so now they just have to go back and start cutting everything out, cutting in the base paths, the football hash marks, and all the other markings of the field. We're also, I've also been speaking with Sports Tech about thinking about getting the tennis court finish work started. As a reminder, we need a good 50 degrees and up night and day to get that work going. So just a little optimistic that it's looking like maybe next week or the following week, we're going to be starting to see some 60-degree weather. So we have that ready to go. So, and as Jim mentioned, high school, middle school, I've been in contact with the 2 low bidders. Notice to proceeds have been sent out. They are eager to get started. We're just hashing through all the paperwork. So they're pretty excited about getting going. They would like to start, especially the exterior masonry pointing and renovating work. They all said that they would be willing to work off of man lifts, and they would just put a man on a different elevation of the building, which is great. It'll keep them all separated and moving along. So
Frank, can I ask a quick question? I'm sorry
Sure.
to go back to Glover. What is the anticipated completion timeline for Glover for the turf?
The turf, you're looking at approximately 2 to 3 more weeks, Cheryl.
That's
So they
it.
need another 3. That's it.
Wow, that's good news for the
Yeah,
baseball team.
So yeah, that's great. So we're looking at, like I said, 2 to 3 weeks, and they should be wrapping up.
That's fantastic.
And then it's just the tennis courts and some miscellaneous punch list items, and Glover will pretty much be, as they say, in the books. So,
All right. Then we'll just got to wait for the governor to let us all go back to school, and that field will get put into really good use right
oh,
away.
it sure will. It sure will.
That's great.
So
Good.
that,
Yeah, any more questions for Frank? Thank you. That's a lot of great news, Frank. Really, really good. I'm just excited about the steel. I guess
yes, yeah.
that's the silver lining, I guess, from everyone else having to pause their construction.
That's usually what you typically have to wait for, but
yeah,
if any good came out of this, that is it.
that's great.
Well, the pictures have provided us with happy updates. A lot of bad news that continues to come our way. And
Yep.
this pause keeps getting extended and questions aren't being answered. It's so exciting to see all this work happening. So thanks for those updates and all the hard work.
Yeah. And thanks too. I was going to say, I know Frank, I know you guys have been vetting the Prospect Hill bids, so we'll be dealing with those at our meeting next week. So
Okay.
thank you for that work.
You're welcome.
Does anybody have any other questions or comments? Jim, any other updates? Are we all set?
I did. That's what I had for the budget. And then as far as managing access to the buildings, we've got a custodial in our buildings every day. Certainly managing access to the buildings and making sure we keep it safe. And those guys are really doing a great job in coming in. And then we've got safety and security monitors on Tuesday, Thursdays at the middle school entrance. You know, I mean, there are people that still need to pick things up, and they work through their school principals. And we've been able to have a way for people to pick up those things while maintaining safe distances. So,
Jim, do you want to mention food service too?
Thank you. Yes,
Yep.
food services is still working every day at the Hutchinson site, 3rd Avenue entrance. They distribute between 8 and 10 every morning, free meals to any Pelham student who wants it, really. So there's no limitations on whether or not there's income requirements or anything like that. If they come up there and they're a Pelham school student, they're eligible to receive the meal. They'll get a lunch, they'll get a breakfast, and they'll get a lunch. 8 to 10 every day.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right.
Okay. I think that's it for our updates tonight.
Do I have Eileen? Maybe I'll call it tonight. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Motion to adjourn, so moved.
Okay, second.
Second.
Sorry, I
And
just,
Sue and Vinny.
my mute wouldn't work.
That's okay. You lost your chance.
It's all right, we got you.
It's a special meeting. I'm not really on.
Yeah, I'll take it for the special meeting. We'll count on you next week. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you very much. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks so
Stay
much,
safe.
everybody. Have a
Thank
good
you.
night.
Good night.
Good night.
Stay safe.